Hello everyone. In this session, we are going to learn how to create a new project in Proteus. Before we start designing any circuit, it is important to understand how a Proteus project is created and what options are available during project creation. Proteus provides us more than one way to start a new project depending on the versions of the Proteus and the workspace from which you are starting. In this session, we will cover the commonly available methods and explain the different screens of the new project wizard in detail. So, the first and the most important method is to create a project from Proteus start page. So open the Proteus design suite from the start menu or the desktop shortcut. So I will prefer a shortcut method. So if you can see on my desktop, there is an icon named Proteus 8 Professional. So by simply double clicking this icon, the Proteus Professional suite will open. Now, as you can see from the screen, there are different ways to open a new project. The most and common method is you have to go into the file menu and here you will observe one option, new project. So simply clicking on the new project, you can open the new project wizard. So as you can see, I have clicked on the new project and you will find that a new project wizard will open here. So this is one of the methods to open the new project wizard. The second method to open a new project is again go into the file menu and here for new project you will find out the shortcut key is Ctrl N. So by simply pressing the Ctrl N on my keyboard, again the new project wizard will be opened. So this is the second method. I will cancel it. I will prefer the third method, which is the easiest one. So as you can see, when you open the Proteus, you will see this is your start page. So here you will see a shortcut new project button. So by simply clicking on this new project button, you can also open the new project wizard. So I will prefer this method. Now this wizard will guide us through several steps required to create and configure this project. We will now go through each screen of this wizard one by one. In this screen, as you can observe, this screen is used to specify the project name and the location. This is one of the most important steps because Proteus needs to know where the project files will be stored. In the name and the project name field, enter a suitable name for your project. So here you can give the name of your project. So for example, if you are going to create a simple LED circuit, then we can give a project name such as simple LED circuit. So for my project, I can give the name simple LED circuit. The project name should be meaningful and should indicate the purpose of the project. I will prefer that avoid using confusing names such as project 1 or test 1 or new project, etc. A meaningful name makes it easier to identify the project later. The next tab is regarding path. Now you have to specify the project location. This is the folder in which your Proteus will create and store the project files. So if you can see, my path is in drive C in users folder. In users folder you are having the Dell option and in Dell option you are having the documents. So in documents folder my project will be created. But if you want to create a new folder to store your files, then you have to change this path. So for that, what I will do, I will create some new folder. So for this, I will go to the browse option. So once I will click on the browse option, let me create one new folder on the desktop. So on desktop, I will right click it and create a new folder to store my Proteus project files. So here I will give the name to this, that is Proteus projects. So I have prepared one new folder named Proteus projects. So I will select this folder, and if you see here in the path, now the folder is created named projects Proteus. That means my Proteus projects are going to store in this Proteus projects folder now. It is a good practice to create a separate folder for your Proteus projects. Inside this folder, you can maintain separate projects for different experiments or circuit. Once the project name and location has been specified, click Next. The next screen is related to the schematic design of the project. Proteus asks whether we want to create a schematic from the template. A schematic is the electronic circuit diagram that will eventually design in the project. Depending on the Proteus version, you may see the different options such as create a schematic from the selected template or do not create a schematic. If you want your new project to contain a schematic, select the option create a schematic from the selected template. Proteus may provide a list of available schematic templates. For normal electronic circuit design, default templates is generally sufficient. So by default, it is clicked on default. If you are starting a completely new circuit and do not require a special template, then select the default or blank template. At this stage, we are only deciding how the schematic document will be created. We are not yet adding or placing any electronic components. So after selecting the required option, click on Next. The next screen deals with the PCB layout. Proteus can be used not only for the schematic design and simulation, but also for designing a printed circuit board. So therefore, during project creation, Proteus gives us the option of creating a PCB layout. You may see an option similar to create a PCB layout from the selected template, and second option is do not create a PCB layout. If your project will eventually include PCB design, you can select the option to create a PCB layout. Proteus may provide the different PCB templates. For a simple learning or simulation project, you may not need to create a PCB layout at this stage. So in this case, you can choose the option to not to create or do not create a PCB layout or leave the PCB creation option disabled, depending on your version of Proteus. This does not prevent you from working with the schematic and simulation. A PCB layout can be created or configured later if required. Once you have made your selection, click Next. The next screen is related to the firmware. This option becomes particularly useful when we are designing microcontroller-based electronic systems. Firmware is a program or code that runs on a microcontroller. Proteus can combine electronic circuit simulations with microcontroller firmware simulation. Depending on your Proteus version, you may see an option for creating or configuring a firmware project. If you are creating a simple electronic circuit such as resistor circuit, diode circuit, or amplifier, you generally do not need to create a firmware project. So in such a case, you can leave the firmware option disabled or proceed with the default settings. If you are specially creating a microcontroller based projects, these steps becomes more important. Depending on the available options, you may be able to specify the required firmware environment or related settings. For the beginner level, circuit simulation projects, the default option is normally sufficient. So I will click on the no firmware project because I will not requiring the firmware, or I am not creating the firmware project. So I will click on no firmware project. After making the required selection, click next. The final screen of the wizard is the project summary screen. This screen allows us to review the options selected during project creation. Carefully check the following information here. So here the project name is specified along, and project location is also specified. Schematic creation option is there. Schematic template is there. PCB layout option is there. PCB template if applicable, and firmware option if applicable. This is good opportunity to identify any incorrect setting before the project is created. If you notice any mistake, click on the back button, go back to the relevant screen and modify the required settings. If everything is correct, then finish OK. And then click on finish. So once you will click on finish, the new screen will open. The Proteus creates a new project. Proteus creates the required project structure and the files in the selected location. The newly created project is then opened in the Proteus environment. Depending on the options selected during the project creation, the project may contain a schematic document, a PCB layout document, firmware related information. If we select only the schematic option, we will primarily work in the schematic environment. At this point, the project creation process is complete. Notice that what we have not yet added any electronic components or created any circuits. Those activities will be performed in the next stage of the project. Now, I recommended some settings for the beginners. So, come to the presentation, and here you will see that if you are learning Proteus for the first time, you do not need to enable every available option. For the basic electronic circuit simulation project, a simple configuration is usually sufficient. So for that, use a meaningful project name, select an organized project location, create a schematic using the default or a blank template, skip PCB creation if you are not designing any physical PCB at this stage, skip firmware configuration if your project does not involve a microcontroller. Finally, review the settings and click finish. Now, the important points you have to remember here is the exact screens and the names of the options can vary slightly depending on the Proteus version. Some versions may combine certain steps, while other versions may display them as separate screens. Do not worry if your screen looks slightly different from the demonstration. Look for the equivalent options related to the project name, project location, schematic, PCB layout, firmware, and click on finish. The overall project creation workflow remains very similar. Also remember that creating a project does not require us to immediately design a circuit. We can create the project first and begin the actual schematic design afterwards. Now, this completion of this will finally discuss the project creation workflow. So as you can see from this diagram, the project creation workflow consists of, first you have to open the Proteus. Once you will open the Proteus, click on new project. In new project wizard, you have to enter the project name and project location. Then after that, you have to configure the schematic. Then on the next screen, you have to configure your PCB layout if required. If you want to create the PCB layout, then you have to create or you have to click on create PCB. Otherwise, you can skip this step. After configuring the PCB layout, you have to configure the firmware settings if required. And at the last screen, you have to review the project summary. And if everything is okay, you have to click on finish. So once the project is successfully created, we are ready to move to the next stage where we can begin working inside the project environment. In the next session, we can explore the Proteus interface and understand the purpose of the different panels, toolbars, modes, menus, and the workspace before designing our first circuit. So friends, we will end this session here. So thank you very much.